What if I told you that in the heart of Paris, during the late 19th century, there were more than 200 legal brothels operating, lavish palaces where aristocrats, artists, and politicians mingled under the glow of gaslight? Imagine a single night in one of these places costing up to 5,000 francs, enough for a middle-class family to live comfortably for an entire year. Behind the velvet curtains, champagne flowed like rivers, and entire rooms were decorated in Egyptian, Japanese, or Indian styles, designed not just for pleasure but for spectacle. But here's the twist. While nobles and geniuses like Toulouse-Lautrec or Oscar Wilde sought inspiration and escape within these walls, more than 90% of the women who worked there came from crushing poverty, trading their youth for survival. Was Paris truly the city of art? Or was it the city of desire disguised as culture? Stay with me until the end, because every detail will reveal how this hidden world shaped the myths of Parisian glamour. And if you love exploring the forgotten stories of the past, give me a like, a subscribe, and share this video. Your support keeps these tales alive and fuels the next journey back in time. At the end of the 19th century, Paris was not only the city of light, it was the capital of pleasure. Believe it or not, there were more than 200 legal bordellos scattered across the boulevards and hidden alleys. These weren't dingy corners of vice. They were proud, glittering establishments with names etched into the city's nightlife like landmarks on a map. Imagine walking down a cobblestone street at night, gas lamps flickering, carriages rattling past, and neon-like signs glowing above grand doorways that promised escape from the rigid rules of society. What fascinates me most is how public this world was. Everyone knew these places existed, yet they were treated almost like theaters. A gentleman could step out of the opera and straight into a house of luxury without fear of scandal, as long as he played by the unwritten codes of discretion. And inside, a glass of champagne could cost as much as an entire week's wages for a factory worker. That contrast has always struck me. One city, two realities colliding under the same roof. On one side, aristocrats and artists laughing over velvet couches. On the other, the invisible struggles of those who served them. I can't help but wonder, was Paris celebrating freedom? Or was it simply indulging in inequality dressed up as glamour? Perhaps it was both. Either way, the city earned its reputation as the playground of Europe, a place where desire and decadence danced hand in hand. And this is only the beginning, because when we look closer at the extravagant price of a single night in these palaces, the story becomes even more shocking. Let's step inside one of the most luxurious houses and see how 5,000 francs could buy more than pleasure. It could buy an illusion of power. Now imagine this. One night in a Parisian bordello could cost up to 5,000 francs. To put that into perspective, that was enough for a middle-class family to live comfortably for an entire year. We're not just talking about a bed and a bottle of wine. These places were palaces of fantasy. Take Le Cabinet, perhaps the most famous of them all. Its rooms were designed like a world tour of desire. An Egyptian chamber with hieroglyphs and golden statues. A Japanese salon with silk screens and painted lanterns. Even an Indian room with carved wooden furniture that looked as if it had been stolen straight from a Maharaja's palace. Some say there was even a bathtub made of solid silver, where champagne replaced water on certain nights. When I picture that, I can't help but smile and shake my head. It feels almost unbelievable, like something out of a novel. But the truth is, money had the power to turn fantasy into reality in these places. For the wealthy, 5,000 francs was not just a price, it was a ticket to step outside ordinary life. To feel like royalty for a night. I sometimes wonder how intoxicating it must have been. Not just the champagne, but the illusion of control, of being untouchable in a world dripping with velvet and candlelight. And yet, behind the sparkle, there's a shadow. These grand rooms whispered of power and beauty, but they were also built on the backs of those who had very little choice. That contradiction is what makes this history so haunting. Still, it was within those walls that art and pleasure collided. Which leads us to the next chapter. How more than 20 artists and writers, men who shaped culture itself, found their muse inside these decadent salons. What surprises me most is that these grand bordellos weren't only about desire, they became salons of creativity. More than 20 famous artists and writers found themselves drawn to these velvet-draped rooms. Imagine Henri de Toulouse-Lautrec sketching by the dim glow of a lamp, capturing the curve of a courtesan's smile with the same passion he poured into his posters. Or Oscar Wilde, sipping absinthe, spinning witty lines in between conversations about art, love, and the absurdities of society. These were not just fleeting visits, they were moments when the boundaries between inspiration and indulgence blurred completely. I like to think of it this way: while the rest of Paris discussed politics in cafes, here the air was thick with music, smoke, and scandalous ideas. A pianist might play Chopin in one corner while a poet scribbled verses in another. To me, this is the most fascinating detail. Art was being born in a place society pretended to look down on, yet secretly celebrated. It shows that creativity often thrives in the margins, in spaces where rules are suspended and masks are lifted. And if I'm honest, I feel a strange admiration for those who dared to mix art with such a forbidden world. It makes me wonder, would the same works have existed if these men had stayed in polite drawing rooms instead of chasing inspiration through shadows and perfume? Maybe not. And yet, while the salons glittered with genius, behind the curtains lived a very different truth. Women whose lives were far from glamorous, carrying the weight of survival beneath the city's laughter. That's the side of the story we need to face next. Behind the chandeliers and velvet curtains, there was a reality most guests never cared to see. Nearly 90% of the women who worked in these establishments came from poverty. Many were daughters of farmers, seamstresses, or servants, drawn to Paris by the promise of work but trapped by the harsh truth that survival often meant selling their youth. Some were barely in their late teens, carrying the weight of families they had left behind in villages that would never know the truth of where their money came from. I often think about the contrast. While nobles sipped champagne and debated art, these women counted every franc, knowing that without this work they might have starved. And yes, some found a strange form of protection inside those walls. Better a gilded cage than the dangers of the street. But make no mistake, the glamour we imagine was built on sacrifice. When I picture a girl adjusting her corset in a mirror before entering a room filled with strangers, I don't see luxury, I see resilience disguised as beauty. It's easy to romanticize the past, to imagine only the music and laughter. Yet behind every sparkling story was someone who paid the price. That tension, between dream and despair, is what gives this history its haunting power. And as the century turned, that very tension forced Paris to question itself. Were these houses symbols of freedom, or of exploitation? That question leads us to the final chapter. How the City of Light began to close the doors of its gilded brothels and wrestle with the legacy they left behind. By the dawn of the 20th century, the glittering doors of Paris's grand brothels slowly began to close. Changing laws, shifting morals, and the rise of a new, more respectable society pushed them into the shadows. Yet their legacy never truly disappeared. In paintings, in novels, even in whispered family stories, the echoes of those nights still shimmer. Paris continued to market itself as the city of love, but the question remains: was it truly the city of art? Or was it the city of desire hiding beneath silk and perfume? Personally, I think it was both. Paris has always been a paradox, where beauty and brutality, freedom and exploitation, often lived side by side. That tension is what makes its history so captivating. When we think of Toulouse-Lautrec's sketches or Wilde's words, we see genius, but behind them are the faces of women who paid the price for that inspiration. To me, remembering both sides makes the story richer, more human, and far more honest. So perhaps the answer is not to choose between art or desire, but to recognize how deeply they were entwined in the city's soul. Paris was, and still is, a place where dreams and illusions are sold, whether in galleries, theaters, or hidden rooms lit by candlelight. And maybe that's why we're still fascinated, because in those contradictions, we catch a reflection of ourselves. If you enjoyed this journey into the forgotten corners of history, don't forget to like, subscribe, and share this video. Your support helps keep these hidden stories alive. And I promise, the next tale we uncover will be just as surprising, just as haunting, and maybe even more unforgettable.